I don't know if you're trying to take down this podcast thing.
No, that's not true.
It's not what you're used to. Social justice, marriage, love, and poetry.
I'm very nervous about what I said now.
5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome back to
Buckle up, baby.
That was particularly raspy. I left you hanging on purpose. Episode 14.
14.
Back-
Double digits.
What's that?
Double digits.
Yeah, we've been double digits since 10.
Oh, but we still are.
We're back in the original studio where it all started all those months ago.
Feels like a very long time. Since
Does
we
it to
started
you?
This. It feels like a very long time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did we start? In the summer of 2021?
Summer of 2021? Yeah, what, in like August?
Yeah.
I actually think it was like October.
But we're at 14. We're in it.
Yeah.
It feels
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Many things to discuss today. It's nice to be in this. Let's talk about our studio here. Is this going to become
nice.
the permanent
It
space?
could be.
This is
It
my
could
home
be.
studio where I
Leave a
make a lot of music, do a lot of things, a lot of content, and we started in here, and then we've been doing it in your home attic space.
Yeah.
which I like. It's
yeah.
echoey, but it's freezing.
It's freezing. Today was the limit. We couldn't do it there anymore.
Yeah, 15 degrees outside.
Yeah.
What's the status on your heater?
Javier has yet to call me back.
How does it feel when you're in a house and you have to be a man?
Well, it's funny what automatically falls under my purview.
Yeah.
You know, like anything garbage related is automatically mine. Anything maintenance related is automatically mine.
Doesn't matter like what other things you're carrying. This is just man stuff.
Yeah, carrying packages inside.
Well, yes, Michael, carrying.
Until recently,
you have a pregnant wife, you monster.
until recently, breaking down all the boxes and throwing them out was my responsibility for some reason.
You're only biologically stronger than your opposite sex, and yet the carrying things. I can't complain about the carrying things, but making a phone call or a text.
No.
That could be shared by the sexes.
No, it's not the carrying. It's the if there's anything on the porch, I bring it in. No matter how small the package is.
Or it stays there.
Or it stays there. For some reason, I'm not complaining. That's just the way
That's
it's
just the
shaken
way
out.
it is.
Yeah.
She don't want to go outside.
And she does all of the cooking and child rearing. And I do the garbage.
But that's not because your wife is a woman. It's because your wife is a chef.
It's because she's a chef. Yeah.
The child rearing is 'cause
whenever I try to cook, it's just not as good. No one wins when I do it.
And she gets pleasure out of cooking because she's good at it and she's a chef.
Yeah, I think it helps her. You can leave a comment. If you're my wife and you're listening, you can leave a comment.
You guys should work on your communication. If the only way you communicate is through the comment section of Buckle Up episodes.
She does listen. She said she had a comment on last week's. What was she saying?
So you're not even paying attention.
About people getting canceled. That if we knew all of George Washington's views and Abraham Lincoln's views, they'd probably also be banned from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd miss out on all that good stuff. All that good revolution stuff.
That's definitely a good point. I want to see you and your wife having serious marital discussions in the comment section of Buckle Up as like one thread on one video. That would be amusing for us and disturbing for you.
What about if it was just more like practical logistical stuff?
Hey, can you please take in the package outside? Posted October.
I know you're checking the comments right now.
January 30th. Please, Michael. It's been out there a week. And we'll just see how long it goes.
I don't know how to open the door. Please bring it inside.
That's an interesting point because a lot of times I'm very disturbed by that whole thing in terms of retroactively canceling historical figures who lived in a time where the views that they held still wrong by today's standards. But it's something to think about when everybody holds a wrong view or an immoral view and you live in that context. Doesn't that make it slightly more forgivable or understandable?
I think it's a
dangerous game.
That's how I look at blackface a little bit.
Yeah.
Stay with me for a second. Like if people were showing up that way to colleges in the South in the 90s, like if they're showing up to parties at a college in the South in the 90s wearing blackface, it was probably like pretty widely accepted that people did that. Not to say it's okay or they should do it now, but does it make you a monster to do what like no one blinked at in 1994?
That's a separate
You know what I'm
point. Because you're
saying?
saying if it was funny then, I'm talking about like living in the
Yeah.
time of slavery.
No, but it's the same
right?
thing.
When you're
It's the
living in a
same thing.
historical context where something is universally evil, but everyone is participating in it in that
Yeah.
institution or partial to, or sanctioning it.
Yeah,
So
what's the difference between that and blackface?
well, because it wasn't evil then in the 90s because everyone thought it was funny. You're dealing with a more subjective kind of thing. Something that was deemed offensive now
yeah,
in those days might have been funny, and then the cultural tides have shifted, not because of
Okay.
a real clear moral
but having
issue.
a slave is objectively evil.
Across time,
Got
no
it.
matter the historical context, it's always evil. The question is, how in tune are people's moral intuitions at the time? In other words, there was a time when humanity was just, on the whole, less moral. We have gotten better with time.
Right.
More of humanity overall can see that's, I think, meaning if you reject moral relativism philosophically and say, killing somebody or enslaving somebody against their will is evil and always has been evil. Because you can't say then it wasn't evil, but you can say that more people participated in it, so that to live in that context, it takes someone to be that much more virtuous to stand up against it. So when you look at our forefathers and Thomas Jefferson writing about the evils of slavery, even though he owned slaves, you can say, well, he might have been tapping into something that everyone else was rejecting. What if it comes a time from now,
Right.
in 1,000 years, when we're all eating synthetic meat, right?
That was my next question.
And someone goes, how? And it's deemed our great-great-grandchildren. So, oh my God, they ate live animals?
Right.
That's monstrous. Now, we don't feel that way now.
Yeah.
But who knows what will evolve and change over time. And it could be that in the days where they're growing meat from a cell and you don't need to have the type of factory farming and, slaughtering of animals that we have today.
Yeah.
The point is, will you then write off every moral figure or any person of virtue of this time because they ate meat?
Right. And I don't
I'm not
think
equating the two, but it's the idea of that the morality can evolve.
Right. And
as well.
I'm not forgiving anyone who owned slaves, but I also think there were probably some pretty decent people. I wonder.
The final episode, 14. We made it to 14.
Well, no,
And
'cause-
Michael, something happened. And did you come back from a protest or rally recently? Yes. Say what you're gonna say.
No, I wonder how. No, we think of George Washington as evil. For you're saying it's objectively evil.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is. But
it definitely is. It's certainly objectively evil to like imprison someone and torture them and have them like be a slave in the way we think of it now. I wonder if in George Washington's home, I'm just curious what the life of a slave was like, and I wonder if it was, if you would see it and go this guy is a monster, or you go, all right, you shouldn't be owning slaves, but like I see your household, and like I wouldn't even.
I guess it's possible in the context of that time.
In that context,
that there were moral people or otherwise good people who participated in this evil institution, which was universal.
Yeah,
I can understand that, and there's obviously a range of a spectrum, but I'm just talking about the institution in and of itself.
Sure.
And I don't know if you're trying to take down this podcast single-handedly.
No. Well, biblically, in Judaism, slavery is allowed. I mean, like within very specific parameters.
I'm just seeing, by the way, just to get ahead of it, the articles written on Buckle Up,
right?
And you in quotes, Michael Weber saying, "I think good people." Just know you're going to get quoted and destroyed. So I am preemptively canceling you so that you can't be. I'm uncanceling you.
I shouldn't have put it in the title of the podcast.
Of the podcast. What you're just trying to examine is what actually life was like in that time period and what people were like in terms of their moral.
Yeah, no, I know. I think you said it well. You can participate in institutional evil and still retain some of your morality. I mean, like the same way in Nazi Germany, like it was too much for some people, and like they weren't hiding Jews in their basements. And there are people who condemn them as 100% evil. And something I like to do in like some of my writing also is explore how people can participate in these evil institutions, how good people can participate in these evil institutions.
I know we bring them up a lot, but Jordan Peterson makes that point all the time that we're all on this huge spectrum. I don't even have to do the impersonation, but I will. Ha! No, but Ordinary Men, there's a book he talks about called Ordinary Men, about it's not that evil people are these like different beings. It's that we all possess this in us. And what's scarier is when good people do evil things and what it takes to get good people to believe what they're doing is virtuous or good. And that's kind of happening now with certain things where in the name of some kind of virtue or in the name of some kind of purity, we're doing, or ideological purity, or, we talked about it with all the stuff going on with vaccine. Like you can see, wow.
I'm very nervous about what I said now.
No.
I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, in quotes.
Such a
In
bad
quotes, it's
soundbite.
horrific, but
That's
you're being honest. You're having an honest
But that's
conversation.
what happened to the SNL dude, Shane Gillis. It was
I
it
know.
was a soundbite.
It was a soundbite, but he was also saying it repeatedly. I hear you. I hear you. This is a podcast. We're talking. Don't be nervous. It's okay. It's okay. Don't be nervous. Listen,
Okay, I'm listening.
I understand what you were saying.
Yeah.
You were just saying, what was it like?
Oh no, of course. But taken out of context, it sounds awful.
And luckily, the world of out of context, people have less and less patience for.
Yeah.
We won't reel this clip.
So anyway, you're saying
We won't make a digital
Just put
short
that
of
one
this
up.
clip. Speaking of which, we can move on to that. But all because of your wife's point, she single-handedly planted this comment on a video so that she would bring down this podcast
She wants this to end.
with my follow-up to her.
I think maybe she's coordinating with your wife.
Yeah, maybe. But anyway, what's interesting about context?
How good people.
Oh, and about how good people can do terrible things.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point she made about cancel culture and how dangerous it is because you're not considering the historical context.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that if you lived in a time where there were universal evils going on and you weren't fully fighting them, even though at some points you might have been, or you were part of the system, we're not even necessarily made aware in the context that we live in now of what would be considered universal evils going forward. There is an evolution to it.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't say evolution because that implies that at some point it was fine and then it evolves to be better. More like a discovery. In other words, we take for granted the time that we live in now, but it took human beings an enlightened discovery to realize what kind of decrepit, immoral context they were living in.
Right. And it's happened relatively fast in terms of civil rights.
And it was we take for granted also that human rights as a concept we take for granted. We just live with that. There was a time it didn't exist. Right. The idea of a sovereign individual, which you agree with fully, right, Michael?
What do you think we'll look back on in 50 years? So meat was one example. What's another one that you think we'll look back on and go, oh my God, you guys did that?
It's a great question.
Yeah. Healthcare, universal healthcare?
No.
Okay.
That one? Well, because that one.
You don't think they'll be like, oh, people had to pay to go to the hospital?
No, because that whole argument is fallacious. This idea that it just exists.
What's fallacious? How would you define fallacious?
They're the fallacy of.
Oh.
Yeah, you were thinking fellatio?
I was, yeah.
Oh no, fallacious is a word.
I know.
You have a sick mind. Fallacious. The fallacy underlying, we could get political, but this idea of entitled to a service. Healthcare is a service that has to be provided by other people.
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It seems fallacious now, but in 50 years.
No. My point is it has to be provided by other people. And in order to just presume one could just have it, that would involve what?
Can't you say the same thing about civil rights? Like I have to treat you a certain way just because you want to be treated that way?
No, because it's like negative and positive rights. One doesn't have a right to violate your sovereignty, but one isn't entitled to provide you with a service.
See, I think it's a great example because
healthcare is not included in one's sovereignty because in declaring it a right, you are essentially requiring somebody else to provide it to you, which violates their sovereignty.
What I'm interested in is how deeply you reject the idea. Something that deeply rejected could be so deeply accepted.
What do you mean?
By like you have the whole argument that's logic based and reasonable of why you reject it. Yeah. It's interesting that how something that seems so obvious to you now could be so obviously thought of in a different way by someone in a later generation.
I know what you're saying.
Someone
but
said the same thing about slavery, like with the same confidence. They were like, "It is, slavery is a right." No, really, like someone in the South who grew up with it
would say that.
Would like.
There's another quote for you. Slavery is a right. Quoted Michael Weber.
With the same.
He went on to say slavery is a right.
With the same moral righteousness or the same moral clarity,
vigor and certainty.
Yeah. So like in 50 years.
Look, it's. I understand your point. It's valid to say you're not aware of
what you're not aware of.
Of what you're not aware of, but let's just go philosophically for a second. With slavery, I'm holding as a constant a principle of the individual as a sovereign, free human being that has its rights protected, and rights meaning rights from coercion of other people. Slavery violates that principle,
Yeah.
and so does forcing someone to provide someone else healthcare.
Right.
Like the same principle applies to both.
Right.
So I don't see them as just one thing or another.
But that's a relatively new idea also, that someone of a higher class can't just force someone of a lower class to do whatever they want.
It's a new idea.
Yeah,
It's a new idea that makes slavery immoral and wrong, and it makes the government mandating or providing or forcing others to provide for other,
So isn't it possible?
It's the idea of coercion being wrong.
Right. So isn't it possible someone would say like the human body is everyone's responsibility, and if one human body is suffering, it's the entire country's responsibility to help it.
It violates that.
Think like that,
but it violates that principle. So if we're holding as a standard that force is wrong amongst human beings, because in order for someone, this is like a very Ayn Randian view about it, and it's a very absolutist view about it, but just to articulate the point, in order for a human being to thrive in this world, they have to be free to use their mind. I'm making that objectivist moral argument for individual rights. They have to be able to use their mind. They have to be able to reason. In order for them to be able to reason, they have to be able to be free to use their mind, and they can't violate other people's rights in doing so. They make a bit of a jump in that, but the idea is, in order for, what's our standard? Our moral standard is, how does a human being thrive in this world? And they thrive first and foremost by using reason, by using their rational mind.
This is Ayn Rand.
And they operate in their rational self-interest. This is like the Randian view. And the only way to do that is to have as a moral standard that the human being must be free and sovereign, free from coercion. In order for that person to be free from coercion, that individual, they can't coerce other people, because the idea of coercion between human beings cannot exist. And that's the role of government, to serve as a mechanism to remove force from society, from individuals. But anything that violates that,
how is free healthcare coercion? Because the government's paying someone's
where does the government get money from?
Taxes.
Yeah, and in order to get health care entitled to you, you have to force somebody else to pay for it, or to provide it.
How is that different than like roads? Like the guys who's building
public
the
roads is not terribly different if they're funded by taxes.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of private roads that are managed privately that people voluntarily exchange in to manage, and you pay a membership. And they're better run generally than public roads. France has a lot of private roads, for example.
So healthcare, no.
What?
That's healthcare is not something.
Anything where the government's involved, except for the protection of individual rights. This is the Randian view, to the best of my knowledge. This is the objectivist argument.
Have you read something besides the novels on Ayn Rand? Or watched videos, or like researched it?
No, I don't think so. I know I've read a lot. I've read Atlas Shrugged and a little bit of The Fountainhead, and I've watched a lot of talks and lectures.
You've watched talks. Okay.
I haven't read like the philosophical books,
but
or any other books.
This isn't just from the story.
No, it's not just from the story derived from the story, but there's a manifesto in Atlas Shrugged that explains all of that.
Right,
it's John Galt's big speech that explains. Really lays out the philosophy of objectivism, and then I've really looked into it and watched talks about it and had it explained and broken down, and it's interesting.
Right.
How it translates into reality has its gaps for me, and also in terms of human interaction, it's less black and white, and objectivism doesn't say much about the positive responsibility or morality of doing something for other people that you might not gain anything from, other than if you walk by a car and someone's locked inside and they need help. It doesn't speak to that proactive responsibility. If you see a baby in a car, is it immoral to just walk by?
Well, that's how she died, Ayn Rand. She was locked in a car in the summer. Not a single person helped her.
We'll clip that. She didn't.
I think she did.
Are you being serious?
She was in her 90s. She was sitting in a car and she was banging on the window.
Oh, this is good.
And not a person would help her.
Please, no.
I'm Ayn Rand.
In other words, it talks a lot about how someone is protected from other people, and it articulates articulates a lot of really sound views on politics and economics. When it comes to actual morality, and, in certain scenarios, was that a sneeze?
It was like a half sneeze, half laugh.
Okay.
Okay.
In terms of actual morality, they say you should help other people
Yeah.
if it benefits you. This idea of rational self-interest
Right.
and selfishness as a virtue. It's a hard thing to swallow because
Mhm.
people associate selfishness. If I told you, yeah, you should meet this person and come hang them, they're really selfish, you'd say no because it has a real negative connotation, and they
Right.
try to rescue that term. And more accurately, it's rational self-interest, and that's been very helpful to me as a philosophy.
Mhm.
Doing what's in your best interest, not to the hurt and detriment of other people, because
Yeah.
that's not good either. That's not good for you.
Right.
But there are scenarios where you really, they say, well, if you value human life in general, you would help the person. I'm like, you're stretching it.
Yeah.
So if there's scenarios where, not lifeboat scenarios, but if you walk by a car and you see a baby locked in the car, what does objectivism say about that? Should you break the window down and help the baby? Now, would you want to live in a society where people would let babies sit in cars? You could say for your own self-interest, you would break the car because you want an elevated society with high morality. But then you're starting to stretch. Is it immoral to walk away from the car? My instincts would say, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if objectivism would. I can't speak for objectivism, but it does say a lot of things that are valuable about human interactions, political interactions, and the separation fully of government from economics. Just like church and state is very effective in keeping the peace between religions, church and economics would be much better in terms of keeping the peace between transactions and human beings.
Is objectivism the basis for libertarianism?
No.
No.
Objectivism hates libertarianism, even though they're kind of
What's
similar.
the difference?
Well, libertarianism is more of a political philosophy.
Yeah.
Objectivism is philosophy. It's morality. It's everything.
Got
It encompasses epistemology, the source of knowledge, how we know things, talks about reason. Like libertarianism doesn't talk about why individual rights are moral. It kind of talks about what governmental system is best for, and it talks about human rights and things. There's overlap, obviously, but libertarianism is a little more focused on politics, the role of government.
Did you ever read that article about the town in New Hampshire that went full-on libertarian? This isn't a joke. It sounds like a setup for a joke.
Yeah, but what happened?
I think literally 6 months into this experiment, the town was so overrun by wild bears that it became deserted and no one lives there anymore. Bears were maiming and killing people on the regs.
Yeah.
And everyone moved. I promise. It's an amazing article. I think it was in the New Yorker.
Well, what does that tell you? At least human beings weren't the problem. They were free. But bears don't respect Bears don't respect individual rights. That's a great story because it's so out of left field in terms of all the problems that critiques of libertarianism would expect to happen. Getting maimed by a bunch of bears.
Well, no. The problem was bears were roaming the streets, and it was no one's responsibility to get rid of them.
There was nobody who owned the roads.
I think they were on like porches. They were on like people's porches, and people just couldn't come out of their houses. and the expectation was, well, someone will start a company because people will pay to get the bears rid, but no one did. And everyone just left.
I wonder if this story of yours would stand up to libertarian scrutiny to examine what's going on here.
Yeah.
I'm curious.
We should get a libertarian on the podcast.
Yeah, you have one.
Are you? Is that your official...
card carrying? No, I mean, but if I had to describe myself, am I officially? I don't know what that means. Yeah, I'd say I'm definitely.
You wouldn't say you're a Republican or...
No, because Republican, Democrat are just political parties.
Right, philosophically.
Philosophically, like, Republicans violate principles of libertarianism all the time.
Right.
In terms of the role of government.
Right.
Now, sometimes you risk an ideological purism with libertarian, where a stop sign is just as wrong as murder. You know, everything that there are some schools and leanings of libertarianism where any type of government involvement, anything is evil. And I can understand that because if force is wrong and taxes and all these things, if tax is force and if taxes are by coercion and all that is evil, then any taxes are evil and you can't justify anything. So I'm libertarian to the max amount of allowing government to be small enough to function and do what it does properly and appropriately, which is protect individual rights. And I believe that if implemented those ways, you tend to see things working so much better. And there's countless examples of it. And I've read a lot on the economic side of things from authors like Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman, and Hazlitt and Bastiat and all these guys on the economic side. I've read some Ayn Rand that is influenced my views on this stuff a lot.
And when you say you read, you mean you watched the videos?
No, I've read.
Oh, okay.
I've all read all those guys and watched their videos. All right. But only that. I read nothing else. But in general, yeah, do I identify as that? I definitely lean libertarian on most things and most solutions. As we've seen over the last 2 years, any major source of problems in society can almost always be traced back to large amounts of
government.
This is a big comment I'm going to make and very broad brushed, but large amounts of government intervention that gets involved. And the constant argument is, well, we need more of it. We need more of it.
Right.
And I would always argue, no, we need less of it.
Yeah.
You know, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And every time the government does something, there's a cost. And oftentimes the cost is worse than the benefit. COVID being a massive example. Everyone's like, public health. You got to have the government involved in public health. Seems like a disaster to me, even if I had no political leanings.
I do like the frame of mind of, if something's not working, the solution isn't we're not doing we're not doing enough of it. It's maybe we should be doing something completely different.
And if you get more on the, when you get critiques of libertarianism, you oftentimes you'll get these oddly framed positions where the left sort of has a monopoly on the language of good intentions, where it's like, we want to provide healthcare for everybody. You don't? It's like, yeah, of course that would be a good thing if more people had access to healthcare. But they frame it as to be against their policy, is to be against their aims.
Right.
Which is to say, I think healthcare would be much more widely available from my position if you got rid of licensure laws, and that with insurance you can only buy like fixed amounts per state.
Yeah.
You can't buy across state lines. With Geico and other types of insurance, you can buy across state lines, and nobody complains about the access to homeowners insurance, other types of insurance. But with health insurance, somehow it's a huge problem because you can't buy across state lines. There's a massive racket. And I'm not to say that private business is pure and good, but you have to figure out mechanisms that incentivize those entities to, you blinked, that means you're bored. You to incentivize to incentivize the free market to behave better. How do you do that? Get the government out of it. Because what they often do is there's this big collusion between big business and big government to line the pockets of these people, and the consumers suffer with rising prices and worse quality. Oftentimes, here I go. You don't even need to talk. You blinked again. But the point is, if you can trace it back, everyone likes to say we have this free market and it's failing, but it's oftentimes you find a lot of in areas where there is no government, it's purely free market, like Silicon Valley and technology and other areas. You see examples of it everywhere. Is all I'm saying. And to be against what, say, Democrats or people on the left want the government to do, we could say, well, I just think other mechanisms and free people would do it much better.
I do think it's a problem that it seems like you said the left has like a monopoly on the language of helping people. There is this feeling of we're the ones who care about people and you're the ones who care about your pockets, and then you see someone like Nancy Pelosi who does, like, that's her brand. I care about people. I'm going to get Trump out. I'm going to fight for you, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see what's going on with her like stock market trades and her refusal to admit any wrongdoing. And you're like, do you care about people?
We are going to trade. It is a market, and we are going to keep trading. And I should retire. Right. I really need to lay down. Right? They all need to lay down. That's also there. But then there's like Republican, Democrat, and then there's more agreeable categories of elites and non-elites.
It's almost like a more sinister. It's almost even more sinister than what you would see like an old white Republican man, because like he's not necessarily pretending to care.
Yeah, he's not claiming to care about the little guy.
Yeah,
she is.
Whereas you get a feeling also in the personal life, like he does a nice thing. He probably like is involved in his community, and like he might care about humanity on sort of like a smaller level. Whereas when you perform like you care about humanity on such a large level, what it means is you don't care about any individual really at all.
I actually also call the bluff on people who lean left wing, and I'd like to speak. I have friends and stuff of that persuasion.
I lean left wing, like I do sympathize more with someone like Nancy Pelosi.
I understand, but let me ask you something then. If you're claiming to lean left wing, you claim to care about everybody, but do you really care about them more than your intimate circles?
No, I don't think I truly do care about people sometimes.
But you care about your wife and your children and your friends, child and your child. You care about. In other words, people are, we care about everybody, and there's this feigned egalitarian, like, we care about everybody the same, and and I understand that the argument is like everyone deserves an equal sort of opportunity. But if you asked any left winger, can you pick me up at the airport? I'm a stranger. Can you do me that?
Right.
They wouldn't do it.
Right. Whereas,
hey, can you pick? Not even a friend they would do it for. But if you went up to them and said, hey, can you help me out? It's not that they're any. I'm just saying they're not any more sympathetic or humane. I think some people are more humane than
Yeah.
other people, and some people are more sympathetic.
Yeah.
But it's not because of their
Right.
politics. And these people who claim to be globally in favor of all these things
Right.
that they want the government to do, it's really a way to take the moral responsibilities off of them and put it on other people to say the government should do it.
And oddly enough, the people who come to mind that I think would pick up a stranger, they do happen to be conservative.
And there's these Republican small-town guys with these
Yeah.
values. I'm not saying the lines fall that
right,
cleanly.
right. It's just.
I think it's about the person.
Mhm.
And there's so much variety among individual human beings. I'm like, that's why I'm an individualist. I just don't buy this whole idea that, I've known people who say, it's just wrong that there's not universal health care. And they don't give a shit about anybody.
Right,
And what does that say about them?
right.
I'm like, you wouldn't do shit for anybody.
Yeah.
You're more selfish than that Republican you're saying is a monster in Congress.
Mhm.
You're totally more. And I find that very funny and ironic.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I mean,
and
someone
the
like,
argument is generally as the government gets bigger, the elites. So you have Pelosi, whoever it is, but elites across the strata of business, finance, big business, big pharma, they all collude together to set the rules.
right.
And the only reason that works is because the government ultimately has the power. There's a great line, and they determine what happens. So then it creates this vacuum and magnet of people that go to the government to get things done instead of trying to appeal to consumers.
What's the line you were going to say?
There's a line from House of Cards, which is really, really good.
Uh-huh.
And when that show was strong, it was strong.
Yeah, I
where
stopped watching after
Frank Underwood,
Yeah.
so he's sitting down with the big business tycoon. I forget his name.
Mhm.
There's a whole thing about he's a massive billionaire, and he's trying to, he's fighting with Francis Underwood, and they sit down in this rib joint where they used to get ribs.
Yeah, I
He
know
goes-
that place.
He says, "You see, you may have all the money, but I have all the men with guns." Anyway, I forget what his name was, Lester or something. You see, Lester, you may have all the money, but I have all the men with guns. So, and it goes to Game of Thrones too. Like in my mind, Lord Baelish says to Cersei, "Knowledge is power," and she goes, "Cut his throat." And she goes, "Power is power."
I love that line. I think that's a much better line than the House of
Both.
Cards
I
one.
mean, House of Cards is more modern context. I have the men with guns. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what your money can do or what your money can buy. I have the power of force behind me. And it doesn't matter how big ExxonMobil gets. It can't put a gun to your head and say, buy my product. It can only go to the government to tell you to buy their product.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hear it. Well, either way, I think the line from Game of Thrones is better. But
Knowledge is power.
something Rogan,
Cersei, knowledge
is it
power.
Rogan or maybe Crystal? Crystal Cigar, I think, is probably where I got it from. And maybe we can switch topics.
You're like obsessed with
after
it. Yeah.
this is that what the elites are trying to do is cover up that a lot of the divisiveness in our country really is top versus bottom, elites the haves versus the have-nots, and if people realize that the real separation was the have and the have-nots, that could really lead to some sort of change. Instead, what they want to do is let's break up the have-nots into right and left, and they'll we can split them that way. Meanwhile, at the top, right, left, they're all haves, and they're all at the same parties. They're all part of the same clubs. They all want the same things.
Yeah.
They just happen to be part of this party or that party.
So I hear that argument a lot, and it just sounds way too clean and calculated to me. If only we could get the have-nots to fight each other, we could have all the riches.
Is
There's
that
something-
Nancy Pelosi? That was good.
Yes, I'm Nancy Pelosi. Yes, the Republicans are trying to get rid of the filibuster. Oh.
Yeah, she should talk like that.
She should.
Oh my God, wouldn't that be amazing?
That's her real voice.
if she got in there and says,
I motion to dismiss the Congress today.
with her nails, oh, that would be really good. But instead, she's, I need to lie down. We can trade, and we will trade. Is that a good Pelosi?
I think it's pretty good. Yeah.
She really needs to lie down. It's time. It's time.
She's tired.
I hear that argument. It's too squeaky clean. And I think a lot of it really comes down to the political divide between people is people like me who suspect a lot of the ills and problems in our society and government stem from too much government. And all of those corruptible people and people who lean more left-wing seem to see the same problems and attribute it to these schemy, big business, tech, pharma people who are in it for profit. And to me, the people who are in it for power are much more suspect. And they're just as corruptible as the business people. But because we're all human beings and everybody's incentivized by different things, but or similar things, or greed, whatever it is. But the point is that the people who are in it for power, I think we should have a much higher level of skepticism and distrust for inherently than someone who's trying to make products and make money making products that we will benefit from directly. Jeff Bezos, to me, is a lot less scary a guy than any congressman or senator trying to ascend and get more power. Because Jeff Bezos has made Amazon for us. And everything in this room and everything that we use, it's the benefits of Jeff Bezos are so obvious and we just take it for granted, what he's done. It's very easy to see why he's rich.
Yeah.
He's powerful in a very different way. Jeff Bezos doesn't really have power over me in the way that the mayor or the governor who locks down schools and restaurants and businesses has power over us. And yet people villainize Jeff Bezos and they praise politicians as our heroes who work for the people. I just don't get that.
That's a crazy test. Look around a room and think about all the things that come from Amazon.
And that's
wild.
It's a big Ayn Rand like objectivist thing, is that they really praise business in a lot of ways, and they think it's not just being pro-business to be pro-business. The gas that you get, that you say this is disgusting. You know how much work and effort and sweat it takes to get gas from a rock in the ground to your car so that you could drive wherever you want. There's so much taken for granted on that side, and yet we villainize and demonize them in our culture, and yet all because that guy's trying to make money doing it. And it's a small price to pay to give Exxon or Bezos billions of dollars to get what we get. And yet somebody who's like, I think I want to have power over people. And I'll say it's for good reasons.
Right.
But I'm actually going to use the power of having with the power of force, the power of the gun, I can want to rule over people and make decisions that will affect people against their will. That person is given praise.
So what about,
it's so weird.
then what about a billionaire? And let's end on this. What about a billionaire who runs for office? Is he the worst of both worlds?
No, not necessarily. I trust him more, actually, because he's less swayed by, him or her, more. I trust them more because they can't be swayed financially.
They already have the power.
They've made their fortune.
Yeah.
And if they're seeking it, I actually would think they're doing it for, my gut would say they might be doing it for actually better reasons than somebody who, their currency is power. These people have enough currency.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if they're using it to benefit their companies, if there's a conflict of interest, I get it. But that's why I would restrict the role of government to not have any effect on business, you see, because it's way too close for comfort for me. As if you can work in government and then give special breaks and things like that to your political favors to business, it's dangerous.
Right.
And so anyway, off of that note, I'm addicted to
content addiction.
We'll talk about that now. That was quite a political first half of Buckle Up, or three quarters.
I liked it better though because it was more bird's eye view than specifically with the vaccines.
Yeah, and you say you lean left, but we can go off of it. But of what I said, is anything so objectionable, or it's something to think about? I'm curious.
No.
You gave me a few boring blinks there, like here Ami goes again with this bullshit.
No. I feel like you're more. You can speak much more intelligently about these overarching concepts than anything specific. Same with me. No. All of that sounds good. But these days I'm starting to. I think I'm probably starting to think even like more radically left. Like capitalism is inherently corrupt and like there's no good way to do it. Like the other day I was really like why is communism so bad? Like maybe we could make it work. I don't know. And more like everyone should have healthcare and the other way of thinking about it, just like you may be right, but it's never going to solve any problems. I don't know.
We cannot end there.
Content
Holy
addiction.
Shit. We'll get to content addiction.
What was I thinking?
Communism is so bad.
Let me try to remember how I was thinking about it. Well, I think I was thinking about it like if the world ended and we were, because I was still in my like apocalyptic, like I'm still thinking about that a lot. Yeah, trip. If the world ended and we had to start again and somebody proposed capitalism.
What do you think capitalism is? I'm curious. Let's define our terms.
I don't know how to define capitalism. The right to pursue profit at any cost. I don't know. Whatever it's become today. I think. So let me bring it back to Nazi Germany for a second. I was talking about how good people can do evil things. there's this amazing
You mean like Stalin?
Austrian writer. No, not like Stalin. There's this amazing I forgot his name, but I have a friend from Austria, and when he told me when they learn about World War II, I told this before, they learn about it not the same way we do. They learn about it of how did Germany get us to do all these things?
Like Germany's the bad guy, and we were under their spell.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, not. I mean, I don't know. That's the way I remember him telling me like that. You know, and how can we prevent that from happening again? So there's this Austrian philosopher that they learn as like kids in like elementary school, and he talked about his sort of theory is that what happened in Nazi Germany was not an aberration. It wasn't like things were good and then things went sideways and we got the Holocaust. It was the natural endpoint for German culture and the way that government ran was the Holocaust. That was always going to happen if you took it to its natural conclusion. It wasn't. Things didn't go sideways. They went straight forward, and that's what you get.
Where they were supposed to go from what? What was German
like
culture?
Meaning the I can't I don't want to give specifics, but it was sort of like homogenous. I'm just thinking that, honestly I can't. I don't
there was a
even wanna give
recipe
examples.
baked into the cake that would have inevitably led to the end result of
exactly.
Nazi Germany
Just
becoming
no one
genocidal,
wanted
tyrannical.
Right. And so when I think about capitalism, you think about the natural endpoint for that is kind of where we are, where capitalism is going to get completely mixed up with politics. It's going to exploit all the labor as much as it possibly can until it can completely get rid of them, and it's just going to lead to these massive unequal distribution of the money and the profit. And it just in every single time you try capitalism, it's always going to lead. That's the natural endpoint for it. So why don't we try a different system?
Right.
And for a long time it works out really well.
There's a lot of
but
presumptions.
at the end of it, it's not going to work well for anyone.
There's a lot of presumptions from the get-go in there that you said.
And then we're going to get to content addiction.
Yes. There's a lot in there that isn't capitalism, what you're describing. And oh man, I don't even know where to begin, Michael. That was so batshit crazy. No, I was going to say.
Was it really so crazy?
A little bit, because there's a lot of, I think this idea, capitalism means money. Capitalism means profit. Okay? But if you everything has profit. Every system has a mechanism of profit. The question is, how do you get profit? What does profit mean? And what political system are you operating in that allows one to gain without other people losing? Because in what you said, there's a zero-sum fallacy where people get rich, that means somebody else has to get poor. Right. So there's a fallacy of the zero-sum fallacy in what you said, and I can explain what that means.
I know. I think I understand what that means, but I would say almost it's a fallacy to think at the end of the day it's not going to be zero-sum.
Well, yes, but the question is, I understand that, but the question is, what is the cause of what you're talking about? We talk about the system, these kind of big, vague terms. Capitalism, semantics-wise, let's just get the terms, definition of terms. We're talking about a system.
Crony capitalism, I guess, would be
cronyism is a better term. It's a better, more descriptive term.
But doesn't capitalism lead to cronyism?
No.
How does it not inevitably
Every example
lead to that?
in history where capitalism has been tried. Do you realize that
like
most people lived on 10 cents a day until pre-industrial revolution? Everybody died at 30. And then all of a sudden we started introducing, it wasn't the natural state of things that we had capitalism. We had, for years, we had, feudalism and aristocracy and things awarded to people by birthright, people didn't get rich because they provided services that other people liked. People got rich because of their birthright that was stolen and taken by kings and monarchs and repressive regimes and massive enslavements of other populations over the centuries. And then all of a sudden, and human wealth was down here. Everybody was poor, almost everybody, except for a few elites. What you're describing as this apocalyptic endpoint was the state of humanity for most of history. And then at some point, we started introducing these concepts post-Enlightenment of individual rights. You had Locke and Paine and these thinkers of the Enlightenment that started introducing these ideas that maybe it's the individual who's sovereign. We don't need a king above us to decide what the price of rice should be, where you had some overarching body deciding things and having no price mechanism, no marketplace to trade freely, causing massive. I'm going to get off on a tangent, but my point is that was the state of things, and almost everybody was poor except you were few people, and you happen to be born into the right, royal family, you were rich and prosperous, and everybody else was poor. And that's what you see in North Korea. I don't think Kim Jong-un, the leaders live well. Everybody else.
Do you think he's a doctor? Do you think he calls himself a doctor?
Maybe. Calls himself everything.
Dr. Kim Jong-un.
Everybody else in these societies that have rulers and repressive regimes without any capitalism, there's not a trace of capitalism in the Communist Republic of North Korea. That's for the people, the working people, the exploited people that you're talking about in Venezuela. Most of those people are poor. They survive. They can't get bread. They can't get basic things. They're poor, and only the elites rule.
Okay,
there isn't capitalism. Once you start introducing capitalism, Hong Kong was a fishing village in the 70s, and it started to introduce a little bit of capitalism, and saw massive upticks in wealth and poverty reductions across the board.
Right. But has anyone ran the experiment for as long as America's been running it?
For capitalism?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
And maybe at the end of all these experiments, the same thing happens. The same way at the end of all communist experiments.
I've heard anarchists argue that what happens with capitalism is you get massive freedom and massive wealth creation across the board. Then you get a government who says, "Ooh, wealth. Let's tax it. Let's leverage it. Let's inflate it. Let's leverage it with debt and issue debt on our country and then collapse the country." So maybe you're talking about some overall macro thing, but that's not capitalism. That's government.
Right.
So my point is, a lot of capitalism gets such a bad rap without attributing all the things that it does that are good.
Yeah, but that goes without saying.
It doesn't go without saying.
All right, so you just said it.
I said it.
Yeah.
It sounded like it goes without saying. You're like, capitalism was caused.
No,
all these
I'm
problems.
not. No, well, if you take it as a binary, so maybe I
So then
introduced it wrong.
there's certain things
between
to understand that when somebody gets wealthy in a capitalist system, oftentimes it's because people rewarded them freely for what they do. LeBron James gets rich because we like watching him play basketball. Bezos gets rich because Amazon crushed the competition and we love the products and services. We forget all of that. Nobody questions why these celebrities are wealthy. When Brad Pitt makes zillions of dollars from a movie, we don't say everyone else is poorer because Brad Pitt's richer.
It's a funny reason. It's a funny way to explain LeBron James. People like watching him play basketball.
It's true. He's adding value.
It's true.
We are paying for value.
Yeah.
We made him rich. All of us made him rich. And then people talk about exploitation and labor, forgetting the voluntary element of it, that people are choosing to work in certain environments.
Yes and no.
And you have limited.
No.
But some of the things that are laid at the feet of capitalism, at fault of capitalism, is just the fault of life itself, in that we live in a scarce, an environment where there is scarcity, there is not abundance. We don't live in the Garden of Eden, where everything is just available to everybody. So in a world with scarce resources that have all these alternative uses, we have to make choices, and we attribute what's valuable. People talk about they should get paid more, that group, but we don't. But society is deciding. We're democratizing that. We're deciding what the price of labor should be, what the price of this should be. There's so many different transactions going on in a capitalist market that make things, people forget why prices are the way they are. Why doesn't Exxon just raise its prices three times as much as why don't they do that? They should if they're greedy. And then when the price goes down of gas, do we assume Exxon is less greedy?
I don't think gas, I can't speak that intelligently towards this. I don't think the price of gas is so market based. I think OPEC and governments do play a very heavy hand.
I'm only I get that. But I'm only disputing the argument that it's all just greed and they're just determining this at will. There's this fixed pie of wealth and it's only given to certain people. So I think that's all could be is easily debunkable.
So forget my original introduction of like the binary between either we're capitalist or we're communism. That's I guess I'm just more in the frame of mind of I'm open to alternatives to capitalism. I'm open to the idea that like no one in this country, I mean, whatever, I'll just say it, that once you hit $50 billion, you basically can't have more than $50 billion. Once you make $15 billion in this country, the government takes most of it and gives it back to like the country. To whoever needs it back into
Elon Musk said, all this anti-billionaire BS. It's just, you could take all the money from all the billionaires and you wouldn't solve the deficit.
Sure, yeah, and I also agree with him, but but I'm just sort of like in that.
I understand that there's this seeming, that's like the Marxist appeal. Seems like there's such an injustice when you have this people with such abundance and people with very little, and you could just seem to easily solve that, but I just don't think the equation works that way, because what happens to those billions of dollars? They don't just sit in a mattress. It gets invested in.
They kind of do.
I don't know if they do.
No, the businesses that whole thinking I think is fallacious. I think it's
in that way you just used
fallacious.
It. That means blowjob. By the way. A lot of the money that we see from these excess that they're not going to use personally does get invested back into. I don't mean like job creation.
I think that's the myth, I think, that Reaganomics wants you to believe so they can keep all their money.
It's not Reaganomics. I've heard this argument's made by,
I've just hit my
economics.
limits of how much I can talk about
It's a
this.
Milton Friedman argument too. When you say we just shouldn't have billionaires, we just shouldn't have billionaires. I does think presents a fundamental misunderstanding of how
Is
wealth.
that what Milt sounded like?
No, that's one. He was talking to someone on Phil Donahue.
Is he Milton Friedman? Is he alive?
No, he passed away in the 90s, 94.
I thought he was from like the 1600s.
Milton Friedman? No, you're thinking of Adam Smith.
I'm thinking of Adam Smith. Who's Milton
Right up there,
Friedman?
Wealth of Nations.
Yeah,
What?
who's
Milton
that?
Friedman was a modern day economist, prominent economist, Nobel Prize winning economist of that stripe, very prominent in ending the draft in the U.S. So
Really?
you're welcome. He
I
was a
didn't know
big part
that.
of it because he was very much into individual rights and how the draft was immoral. But that was not his claim to fame.
A
but
Jew?
That was one of his things.
A Jew?
Oh yes.
Good.
And he spoke like this. Excuse me, if you'll pardon me. He spoke like this, very civil, very mature.
That's how people used to speak.
Yeah, it was great.
Did you ever
I discovered him in college watching a series called Free to Choose, and it's him and a bunch of leftists and Marxists and capitalists arguing. And it was
William
like-
F. Buckley also used to. Well, how come we don't talk in that cadence anymore?
William F. Buckley had a show called Fire and Line. And if you watch clips, have you seen Fire and Line?
He used to sit. He's like very low in his chair.
Very
like
low
this.
in his chair. So now you're a Marxist. Now Marx, Salvador Gali once said that in the early histories of early 18th century, there were. I'm going to keep going on this, Michael. We'll have the rest of the podcast, and I'll be William F. Buckley. You made some arguments about capitalism.
No, that's not true.
And that
It's
was
simply
cap-
not. It's simply not true.
No, you made an argument that
It's
communism.
observably not true.
You said something quite astounding to me. You said, "What's wrong with communism?" Well, there's a lot wrong with communism.
Where was he from though? He didn't.
He had a southern drawl. He had a
accent
southern
from?
drawl, and it's kind of a way. He had a unique way of speaking, F.
Yeah.
Buckley. But I love that time when I watch
Yeah.
that stuff online, and it's civil and interesting and stimulating, and not ownage, even though there is like people
Well, it
owning
was
each other.
Real debate.
And
Yeah.
respect, like
Yeah.
intellectual foes.
Yeah.
I miss that because I don't care. I mean, it's fun to watch some of this stuff now, but
Yeah.
it's become like
Oh, it's totally
politics porn.
siloed. Yeah, you can't. Yeah.
And I got educated on. That's how I discovered Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and all these intellectual heroes of mine was because of a show called Free to Choose. My point to you is, you also asked about what's wrong with. You saying I'm just going to say it,
and then we're gonna get to content addiction.
You said I'm just going to say it.
What was I gonna say? Oh, that
You're like I'm just going to say it.
Oh, that maybe communism ain't that bad.
Is that what you?
So
you talk about people talk about these alternative systems. One has to accept first of all as a given that we just don't live in nirvana. Paradise is not for this world. That we can just assume goods come out of thin air. Wealth has to be created. Ideas and services and things that we take for granted that we just have as a given or that are provided to us have to come based on the human efforts of other people that do it.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just declare something a right and then it becomes available. So that's one thing to accept because oftentimes it's laid at the feet of capitalism. Oh, but that doesn't provide enough of this or enough of that. And the question isn't, is capitalism provide nirvana and perfection for this world, but does it provide the most efficient and best mechanisms and most moral means of creating goods and services that free people can trade? And I think you would agree on that.
Yeah, you can agree on that, but can you also then say, but it's not perfect and it needs to be adjusted?
Yeah, because then I think what happens with what you're saying is that you then look for other things that an economic system is not supposed to provide. Meaning, fulfillment, relationships.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Well, you're saying that it doesn't do enough, but in what sense? You're saying
No, I'm just saying that by definition, it's always going to lead to a bad outcome for a lot of people. That it's this. It's
and
this
I could argue
insidious
that
thing.
it leads to the least bad outcomes of all the other systems for so many
So-
more
so
people.
we're
And
not-
every other example has led to mass starvation, death, murder.
We're not saying different things. I'm saying it leads to a bad outcome, and you're saying fine, but that bad outcome ain't that bad.
I guess that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I mean, if you think about it, if you compare poverty, what we call poor here, and our poverty line here, and it's from my position, being raised in an upper middle class background and family, it's hard to say this with any authority, so I'll put that out there, full disclosure. But you can look at the stats of what poverty looks like in India versus what poverty looks like here, and we call it both poverty, but what only rich people could afford 50 years ago, the average person in America can afford now. Once upon a time, these things were microwaves and cars were luxury items. And no one would say owning a Pontiac or whatever sort of low price point car. No one would say that today is a luxury item. It would just be, it's a given. That's what people need. But my point is that those things over time have become more available to more masses of people as we have more capitalism. You get a correlation there because it allows for
right, and
it allows for that. And these other systems that you're talking about have only led repeatedly to the average person being repressed and oppressed.
But I wonder if
in terms of in communism, when you say communism, do you mean a dictator? Because it inevitably leads to one.
No, I don't. No, fine. So I wish I hadn't said communism. I wish I had said just
you
some
did.
other system.
You did, Mike.
I wonder if in 25, 30, 50 years, if the average person who isn't doing that well economically here would say, I feel oppressed and repressed and and I don't feel free. I don't feel free to pursue what I want and to compete. And for my kids to have a better life. Like I feel like the dynamics are such that it's a pretty foregone conclusion as to what their lives are going to look like.
Yeah.
No matter what they do.
Well,
I wonder. But while a lot of people, whatever, I don't know.
I understand that. I also understand that. I don't understand that. No, I'm saying is I get that.
I just watched a show called Dopesick on Hulu, which was really, really good.
Your TV watching is outstanding. I don't know how you cover so much ground.
It's a good. Thank you. That's a very nice
just
compliment.
the scope of what you've seen. I basically
that.
TikTok for hours while you're watching enriching content.
It's based on a documentary, I believe, that I also watched about Purdue Pharma and OxyContin and how that whole thing happened. And one of the storylines was a coal mining family in West Virginia. But I think the thing that speaks to you about that show is how powerless these families who were basically victimized were against this pharmaceutical company, where I think theoretically they shouldn't be. They should have options through their elected representatives to
have recourse,
to have recourse and to change things and to alert people. And like the FDA, if the FDA was supposed to be doing its job and it wasn't doing its job and whatever. And I mean, that's more the frame of mind where I'm like, these people really don't live in the same country a lot of other people live in.
Do you think those people would be, this is going to be a dumb argument, so prepare yourself.
Would they be better under communism? No.
Would they be better in North Korea?
No, of course not. So communism shouldn't be the alternative, but
maybe you mean to say how do we make the areas that fall short or between the cracks better? That's all you're really saying. Well, because if everything else is working,
that's not really what I'm saying. What I am saying
because it's awfully reckless to say let's rip the system down and start something.
I'm not
new.
saying that. I'm just saying it seems that the inevitable outcome of capitalism is to morph into crony capitalism and then sort of morph into something more sinister.
Right. That's why it goes back in full circle to me being very weary and skeptical and concerned about an ever-expanding government that gets involved, because crony capitalism is just as bad as anything else. It's not capitalism.
I don't have
cronyism
solutions.
is big government.
All I have is a podcast, not solutions.
So I get it, but I'm just saying crony capitalism is fair, because what is that? That's, to me, the problem. It's not that I think that businesses are actually saying it's always acting in our best interest, trying to give us just stuff that we like to buy. They have their incentives too. The question is, how do you channel those incentives so that when somebody makes a profit, they win and I win?
It feels like once we're in crony capitalism, I don't understand, and I've never heard really anyone, maybe except for Andrew Yang, who doesn't really have any ideas. Good ideas. And no one has given any idea of how do we get out of crony capitalism. Everyone's like, this is a problem, and no one knows how to get out of it.
The big argument is the push. The people on the Democrats and Republicans will say we need more government policies to regulate these evil businesses.
Yeah, but you can't make government policies now. No one can do anything.
I'm saying
anywhere.
The two arguments that fight each other is one is we need more regulation to control them, and I'm like, you're just as corruptible, you saint, in government as anybody else. And you're going to operate on behalf of yourself and whoever is greasing you. Yeah. And the people in my side of the aisle would say, no, get out of. And then there's someone in between who is just pro-business and says, no, we need to award businesses. We need to give them these things and loopholes. It's like, no, don't give loopholes and awards. Separate the two. Think about church and state. You can make all these arguments with that analogy of, well, no, we should award the Christian church more and the Jewish people and all these different factions of religious factions. Who should have more power now? How should the pendulum swing? Because they're all fighting and infighting, because we give some groups power and then we give other groups power. It's like, no, separate the church and state. It's a brilliant idea. Let free people decide who they want to affiliate with religiously. They form their groups and everybody's happy and filled, and generally it's peaceful relationships when you do. It's when you have an officially sanctioned religion in a country that you get problems.
I hear you saying all this, and my only reaction is no one can do anything.
Yeah.
Even if someone had a good idea, nothing can get done. So what's the point of even talking about it?
don't know.
Let's just talk about content addiction.
Okay. I understand. But I'm glad we fleshed out. It's fun.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I maxed you out. But then again, you went in and said some crazy ass shit that I had to correct for the folks. For the
Fair
folks
enough.
out there.
Who is that guy that
I don't know if I
commented
moved you,
on our
and I'm not
YouTube?
trying to, but I understand what you're saying.
No. I hear you. No, you.
And we're
you know,
back.
You moved me in the sense that I take back what I said about communism is better. I don't think I ever fully meant that. Yeah.
And anyway, this argument that underlies everything is just people forget that when we talk about organizing society, we all should just. You're talking about forcing people to do things they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that never seems to be so, that needs to be pointed out. Every time you hear somebody, socialism, worker co-ops, it's democratized. We all vote. It's like, yeah, but what if I don't want to do that? It's like, no, you have to do that. That's what we're all doing. There's this element of, you got to go along with this because we're all in this society and we're all this collective. So you don't have a voice. It's almost the opposite of, Ayn Rand used to say, the smallest, we want to be protective of minorities. The smallest minority in the country is the individual. But you think about it, that's the smallest minority. That one person has very little power. The masses have the power.
Yeah.
Protect the minority. Mic drop.
I like it.
Michael, how are you feeling on content addiction?
Beautiful name.
I was walking here to this podcast. I had my phone on in my pocket that was playing a clip.
Yeah. So I saw you walking. I asked you to go grab me a coffee and a Chewy, and you came back holding 2 mugs with a phone in your pocket playing a podcast. And I thought to myself, he does that too? I am constantly, it takes all the discipline in the world for me to not start playing podcasts from the moment I wake up. Pretty much from after I'm done writing, there's something playing until I go to sleep, like almost. Like I'm constantly listening to podcasts. Now I'm constantly checking, as sad as it is to admit it, I'm constantly checking the numbers on like our reels and the likes and stuff. I'm constantly refreshing Instagram. And last night also I was feeling so awful, and I was just like, maybe I should just turn my phone off for like 15 minutes and see how that makes me feel. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. The podcasts are the worst though.
The ones you're listening to?
Because podcast is like, if you're a curious person and you like learning and like hearing stuff, it's just this, it's like this. It's so immediate and so great. Right now on my feed, I have like Conan O'Brien interviewing Zach Galifianakis, Joe Rogan, Tim Dillon on Joe Rogan on Tim Dillon. That's like, what, 9 hours of content there, like just in my queue, and like 5 others that like I'm just waiting to listen to.
You know what it feels like? It feels like curiosity that's gluttonous.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just like you're at this feast and your appetite is never satisfied. Your curious appetite, intellectual appetite, creative appetite, and you're just gorging, and we can't stop. It's so addicting.
And it's hard to understand, like when you've pretty much reached your limit with like a certain type of like learning. Like this, there's a podcaster and really successful producer and writer named Brian Koppelman, who has this really amazing podcast called The Moment, where he interviews artists and how they sort of started out. Mm-hmm. And I used to like eat up every single thing he said. And now he just came out with a good episode, so that's also in my queue. And I'm listening to it, and I'm listening like 45 minutes in. I'm like, I really don't need this. Like, I don't need to hear how yet another writer started. Like,
you caught yourself. I'm wasting time.
I've already heard 50, like hundreds of hours probably of him interviewing people like this, but I can't stop listening. Like, I need to move on to something else, and still I can't stop.
The struggle is real.
Yeah.
I find also when the phone hits my face sleeping at night, and I keep pushing, I say, stop. Don't. Put it away.
Yeah.
The couple of days, and I don't say I do this regularly, when I just don't turn on my phone and look at it for an hour in the morning helps. Where I put it away and I say, I'm going to have coffee, do my morning routine a little bit, and I'll open it in just a little bit.
Yeah.
That helps, because turning it on first thing means your mind doesn't have a chance to react to anything. It's immediately, it becomes in a passive state where you're just like, okay, receiving info, as opposed to thinking about anything else. It does all the thinking for you when you're watching it. It it puts your brain on passive mode.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
That we could do maybe.
Yeah.
You know how Joe Rogan does Sober October? What if we did no content mornings for a week?
Very doable. What do you mean by mornings?
You think so?
Yeah, what do you mean by mornings?
Until noon, you don't listen to or watch any content. You don't catch up on news. You don't watch videos. You don't listen to any podcast. You can text with friends.
Nah.
Why not?
Because I post all my stuff in the morning, including our stuff, and get it out of the way so that I can focus on other things throughout the day. Plus, we have Shabbos. So, to be honest, we are protected.
Yeah,
then the average fella,
it doesn't. It has its.
It's still life sucking.
It's not enough.
It's still life sucking. Yeah. I just find like when I'm like I like listening to podcasts, but I don't need to listen to it on my way from shitting to washing my hands. Like I can shut it off then, but I don't. I'm like, I don't want shit stains on my phone, but I'm willing to take the risk for a little Rogan, and that's bad.
Yeah,
that's when I know I'm an addict.
Yeah,
I need to put it down. Because it's great to watch while you're shitting. Everybody does. But, like, the fact that I'll, like, leave it, I was like, you know what? I don't want to keep missing this. And I have to leave it going.
Yeah. And I have wet hands, and I'm trying to touch it, but the button's not going. And I'm like,
all of
this isn't good for my phone. It's not good for me.
You mean wet hands from the sink, right?
No, I've been doing no toilet paper mornings for quite some time now. You save a bunch.
Raw dogging it. Yeah, you know where they don't have toilet paper?
India?
North Korea. But I just mean when I find myself in those moments where I'm like, this is just pathetic. When I was walking into this room to do this podcast and it was on in my couldn't just shut it off. It's so good and so bad. That's the problem.
Well, this goes back to the earlier conversation about the creator economy, and maybe we're gonna look back and be like, too much content. There was too much. It wasn't good for us.
I take it as a double-edged sword, but the edge that I'm leaning into, I'm still happy is there because the anxiety of not having an outlet to and an opportunity like what we have in front of us to grow an audience and do this for real. Without that, the anxiety would be there too, and we wouldn't have a podcast.
Right.
So what you get with this payoff is to learn a little bit of self-discipline and self-control and try to control this behemoth that is the content space. Because I think the opportunity it affords is as a benefit is way better than the cost, and we've said this on previous episodes. It's just a matter of us being disciplined to control it.
We have a mutual good friend who said, I brought this up to him once, and he's like, I used to have an uncle who used to sit at birthday parties with a newspaper, and there was a stack of newspapers next to him. He's like, people who can't control themselves no matter what. Like you'd bring a Newsweek to the bathroom if you didn't have your phone.
And people would say, people are spending too much time reading and not enough socializing. That's okay. It's fucking 17 magazine. What you worry about is your nostalgia. You just launched, but it's true. Gary Vee makes that point all the time. Everyone's knocking tech. They're knocking social. They say kids are not social. Everyone's knocking social. I would argue they're more plugged in and more social than ever before. It's just not what you're used to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Gary, people are killing themselves. These kids are suicidal. Suicide is so underrated, right? Like it's a choice you have to make. Right? And people are worried that it's permanent. I can't have him endorsing that. But nothing is negative to Gary Vee. Nothing except negativity. It's a beautiful thing. More announcements to come on that. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But anyway.
One quick point, because I feel like we might be reaching the hour. Did you see Joe Rogan on Tim Dillon? Tim Dillon went on Joe Rogan. I know. He put out these clips, and you're like, did they do another episode? What happened is Joe Rogan came on to the Tim Dillon show as a guest, which is first of all awesome, because Tim Dillon's a really good interviewer.
Yeah.
Here's my theory about it. I don't like when Tim Dillon's on Joe Rogan. I think it's like not a good representation of what makes him great.
I think he's hilarious, but keep going.
On Joe Rogan, yeah. I think he's way too agreeable. Like he'll make a point. Joe Rogan goes everything and goes right. No, right.
Did you see him on Lex Fridman? Did you see him on the Lex Fridman podcast?
I'm talking about Joe Rogan. I mean, because he knows he's successful for a reason. He knows how to be in these rooms, and like when he's sitting in front of Joe Rogan, he knows how to be.
But he teases him. He teases him, and he does the funniest stuff. He's not so agreeable.
He's good, but his podcast is way better. Is way better. So what I think, this is my theory about it. Tell me if I'm right. Maybe someone will listen to this. Tell me if I'm right. I think Joe Rogan knows it. I think he says, Tim, you're hilarious. I love your podcast, but when you come on my show, it's not the thing I love. How about I go on your show? I'll be your guest, and maybe that way you'll feel comfortable, more comfortable with the dynamics.
Mikey, there is always an agenda.
He doesn't go. Wait, how's that an agenda?
You always think like, let's do this. How about he's like, I'll come on your show too.
But he never does that to anyone. He never goes on anyone's show, does he?
Many times.
Nah.
No, I don't think he does it often.
He went on
loves
Crystal
Tim.
and Cigars.
He goes on occasionally as a guest. He's been on Jordan Peterson's. He's been interviewed by several people. I don't think it's like, let's do this because Michael's theory is true.
No, I think they're talking, and he goes like, Tim, like I love when you come on, but there's something missing here.
I'll give it to you, but I don't think that's true. And I don't think that was what motivated it. I think
Ben, if you're listening,
why don't you come on my show, Joe? I'll go on your show, okay? Muscle Mania. We'll take some testosterone. It'll be fantastic.
I think
then you'll come on my show.
idea.
We'll have a hamburger and you'll pass out.
What he just had?
We adore him. We
he
just
had such a line that I wanted you to say. I forgot what it was. I got to go back and listen.
Okay.
Anyway,
Lex Fridman, you know who that is?
That was a great episode.
It was so funny watching him tickle Lex Fridman and making him laugh.
When Lex Fridman read the poem, I just wanted to see Tim Dillon's face. I didn't watch the video. He's like, you read your poem, and then I'm going to read you a poem.
Oh, I have a poem for you, too. Oh, my God. And also Lex Fridman goes, listen, I mean, look, I'm a regular person, and I mean, he's like, I'm just a regular person, so. Lex, you're not a regular person. There's a robot dog on the floor, okay? You're not a regular person. You lecture at MIT twice a week. You're not a regular person. He's like, and Lex Fridman is just cracking. Fridman is cracking up.
I would listen to a whole podcast of just Lex reading poetry. It was beautiful. It was so.
He's like, what
great.
is it? The blue song that exists.
I have a bluebird in my heart.
I have blue balls in my sack. Did you see Mark Norman on Lex Fridman too?
No.
Oh, hey, you know what were they saying? Oh, he also Lex has these comedians on. It's almost like the geeky kid in high school who's friends with the cool kids, and like they are just cracking each other up. He's cracking Lex up. Like he's this guy. He has Mark Norman on. He goes. They were talking about love. He's like, so can you tell me your thoughts on love? He's like, you ever been in love? No. He's like, you're a virgin? Virgin? Hey, virgin. He's like, yeah, maybe we'll see. He's like, okay, hey, still a virgin. Okay, doing what you do. Whoa, well, hey. Too good.
Yeah.
It's an interesting podcast. He's an interesting person. I still don't know what he is or what he does. I know he's like this Russian genius scientist.
I love the dynamic because it's two people that would never otherwise be talking for that long. It's great to see.
And like Lex will ask these questions that are like very general and serious to a comic that can't take it seriously. I wrote you a poem. Tell me your thoughts on monogamy.
Monogamy. Do you believe in it?
I mean, monogamy, two people, it gets a little weird. She's all crazy about it. It gets all, he's like, people with marriage gets all weird and queefy. It's a great word. Mark Norman uses the word queefy a lot, and it's great.
I could see Lex getting someone like a woman's number and just like relentlessly texting her until she's like, you got to stop.
Something. He's a great addition to this space in this season that we're watching of the new media. Like the Lex Fridman character.
Yes.
It's just like.
Did he follow Joe Rogan to Austin?
I have no idea.
I think he was in Austin now.
He just showed up on my feed in YouTube, and I'm like, this guy in a black, looks like a Men in Black, Russian white Men in Black.
Looks like he's hosting Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and nobody understands it. He's like, I want to talk today about AI, social justice, marriage, love, and poetry. So what? You're not a normal person, Lex. You're not normal. You're not normal. It's okay.
It's not good.
That is episode 14 of Buckle Up.
Buckle up.
Buckle Up with Mike and Ami, and we'll see you.
Did I exhaust you?
I don't think so, but we're over an hour.
All right.
Yeah, and that was a good one, Mike. We delved into the politics.
But this was different. I think better. We talked about politics better than we have in a while. I like this sort of political conversation.
Okay, good. You do a few eye rolls, and we'll see what happens with the first segment. But we had.
We might have to.
We'll be fine.
You might not find this one on the internet.
You can only be open and honest. That's episode 14 of
baby.
Buckle Up with Mike and Ami. We'll see you next time.
Peace.